In this lesson, I'm going to cover some of the monitoring and troubleshooting of remote access, but also I wanted to point out this great utility. So this is the Connection Manager Administration Kit. And in the past, you saw me set up manually that VPN connection. So that's great for me as a sort of power user. I understand these technologies. I can go into the client and configure, but the average user is not going to be able to do that. So what this kit allows you to do is actually create the connection, package it up, and then ship it out to the user. So everything is done automatically for them. It can even enable you to run sort of scripts as part of a connection to maybe patch them, perform some check on them before they actually come through and get connected. But there's another technology that does that as well, as built into the operating system. But definitely take a look at this kit. But outside of sort of setting up that initial connection, there are things that go wrong with this service. Obviously, I'm connecting from a client to the server. And I already talked about one of them. I mean, if I'd have actually gone into this connection, so let me disconnect. Let's say in this connection, I can see it under Change Adapter Settings. If I look at the properties of this, let's say I hadn't used the name. Let's say, for example, I'd used the IP address. Okay. And now I try and connect. Again, error. Because remember, it's using a certificate, and that certificate has the name of the server in it. Well, that server name does not match an IP address. So that can be a common issue. You need to make sure your certificate is correctly configured and that it's actually trusted by the client. So you can't just create some self-signed certificate if the client doesn't trust it. That's why I actually created it at the start using my internal PKI infrastructure that's trusted by this domain joined machine. But if you were using this for users' home machines that weren't corporate assets, they would not trust an internal certificate. You would therefore either have to give them a certificate to add to their trusted root on their machines via a script, or you would actually purchase a certificate from an external authority rather than trying to go through that, adding your certificate to their machine. They may not want to add that to their machines. So you could go and buy a certificate from an internet third party. Also, make sure your user is enabled. Again, if I changed my user here and I removed, so say I just did the default, which is apply through a network policy, and I try and connect, it's going to give me a different error. Now it's failing because of the policy. So it's saying the authentication method to verify. So this error doesn't actually give you a great problem, but the reality is I'm just not enabled for RRAS, which is why it's failing. So you need to make sure either you're using a policy to configure this, or you've actually enabled the dial-in to allow access. So most common causes of problems are your certificates, or the clients can't get to your RRAS server. And the way to troubleshoot is on that client, well, can it even communicate to that server initially? So as part of troubleshooting, you may try and ping that server. Can you resolve its name? Is your user account and password correct? Check the service is actually running on your server. So you need to make sure of all of these different things to enable this can actually be successful. Make sure on the server you've not disabled the default firewalls. Now remember, this would have enabled them for you already. As part of the routing and remote access, it enabled the point-to-point, the port 443 for SSTP. But if maybe you have group policy that will go and deny or turn off exceptions, these have to be enabled to accept those types of connection. Make sure you have matching configurations of the sort of authentication and encryption between the server and the client. Make sure your certificates are valid. And you may be asked sometimes, especially if you're experiencing a problem and you spoke to Microsoft, they may ask you to run debug. There's actually some advanced configuration as part of the net shell command, netsh, that can actually track everything that's going on through the connection. Then you could send that to Microsoft and they can see the actual packets. You could use Network Monitor to actually look at what's going on. But if you do take time to make sure users are enabled, you're using valid certificates so they're trusted by the end user, you have the right firewall ports, you're using matching types of authentication, and you can get to the server from the client and resolve the name, you should be in a great position to use VPN successfully. This concludes the lesson on monitoring and troubleshooting remote access.